Hey everybody, I've got a topic that I've been wanting to discuss, and I've shot video all weekend trying to put this together, and it just didn't work out right. So I'll just edit in some of the footage we got over the weekend. And plus, we had a near miss this weekend, bad one. I'm lucky to be sitting here, let's put it that way. I'll talk about that at the end. But the topic I want to talk about is horsepower when it comes to riding small bikes. You know, horsepower and torque, power output of the bikes. Because as a small bike owner, and you may be a small bike owner as well, or you may be interested in buying a small bike. I apologize for any road noise, by the way. I live near a village. You may get asked a particular question, or you may ask that question yourself. And if you get on YouTube and watch like review videos of the bike you may be interested in or whatever, the reviewer will generally state something that's not necessarily true. And that's kind of one of the things that bugs me about watching small bike videos. I don't want to say I'm annoyed with people and stuff like that, but I think the whole story isn't being told in a lot of videos. And so I wanted to put together a video that demonstrated that. And it's been tough to do, a lot of it because of where I live. I live in a mountainous region where it's heavily forested. So getting, long range shots or even finding a straight road is difficult. Because since I've owned the Himalayan, it has 24 horsepower, and if you ask anybody, they'll tell you it'll do 75, 80 miles an hour. But that's not true. Because when you ask the question, how fast does it go? It's a loaded question, and it depends. Well, how fast does it go on that street? How fast does it go on that street? How fast does it go up that mountain? And how fast does it go on the interstate? It depends on a lot of factors. Even the direction the wind's blowing, affects it, especially something small like the Super Cub. Just the weather can change how fast that bike goes. So I can't tell somebody, yeah, that will do 65 miles an hour. But the conditions have to be exactly perfect to do it, and it's not going to do it for very long because the road conditions and things are going to change quickly. And as soon as you come to a turn or a hill, suddenly you can't do 65 anymore. So I can't sit here and say, yes, this bike does 65 miles an hour, and end of discussion, because that's not true. And when you do speeds like that, if I run 65 on that bike, it affects my fuel economy massively. Because this bike will average about 100 miles a gallon. But that's if I'm running normally and doing, 45, 50 maybe max. But if I'm running wide open throttle on it, suddenly my fuel economy drops down into the 70s. Maybe even lower if I, keep it up. The Himalayan's the same way. I average about 70 miles a gallon on that bike, but that's if I'm running, just normal mountain roads and running the speed limit and things like that. But if I jump on the interstate highway, that drops down into the low 40s. So, it almost cuts my fuel economy in half. So I have to take a lot of that stuff into consideration too. So we went out and shot some footage. I found a hill, because there's not many hills here, even though I live in the mountains, where the road is actually straight enough that I can hit the hill at the speed limit and maintain it at the top. So there's not many roads that the Himalayan can't do that on. Super Cub's a different story, because we got less than half the horsepower, so it's affected more often. So I run into that situation where I just can't maintain the speed limit more often on something as small as the Super Cub than I do on something like the Himalayan. So I set out to borrow a couple of bikes over the weekend to do a demonstration. I was going to get a TW200, a Royal Enfield Meteor, and use my two bikes, because that gave us almost a 5 horsepower difference between all the bikes. So we could see side by side what they did going up this hill. The TW was having some carburetor issues, and then once I was filming, while the TW was actually being prepared for the video, I realized the footage wasn't great, so I ended up just not using it. I'm going to use a little bit of the footage, but you'll see what I'm talking about when I show it. So I hit the hill at the base of the hill at 55 miles an hour on each bike. Then I recorded what was going on. I wanted to record the speedometer so we could see what was happening once we got to the top of the hill. And I'm going to play the raw footage of the Himalayan making the run, so you get a feel for what happened, or in the other videos, because I'm only going to show the final portion of the Super Cub and the Meteor going up this hill. So let's watch that real quick, and we'll talk about it when we get back. All right, so the Himalayan was able to maintain 55 miles an hour, and that's what I was trying to do. I could have gone faster because the Himalayan's 24 horsepower would have allowed me to go faster up that hill on certain segments, but I tried to back off a little bit and maintain 55 the best I could until I get to that final turn, and it gets steep right there, and you can just hear the Himalayan start bogging down and start struggling. I didn't quite have to shift down to clear the hill, so I made it over in top gear. But when it came to the Super Cub was shifting down even before the video you're going to see starts. In fact, I'll play that right now. The Super Cub was already in third gear by the time I got to that steep part, and so it took it down to second to get over that hill, and I was doing nowhere near 55 miles an hour. Then on the Meteor was a little tougher to do because of the riding position. It's not a bike you can really, throw around. And so I tried my best to maintain the 55, and even that bike, when I got to the top, I was shifting down to fourth to be able to clear it at around 40 miles an hour or so. The Himalayan, like I said, it maintained the 55 all the way up to that steep point, and then it started bogging down only on that steep section. And if we look at all the speedometers, a screenshot of all those speedometers right there at the end of that second driveway was my cutoff. That's where I tried to, get the screenshot right there. So if we look at the speedometers of all three of those, we can see the difference. So the Super Cub did around 30 miles an hour, where the other two, they both did about the same speed, roughly 40 miles an hour, but the gearing was different. Himalayan had enough grunt to get up there in top gear, where the Meteor didn't. But that wasn't a really good example, in my opinion, of what I'm really trying to convey, because, like I said, it's kind of the terrain. I can't really show a hill coming up and stuff like that just due to where I live. But there was another YouTuber over in the UK who let me a little bit of his footage, and we're going to watch that. So he's on a Classic 350, which is similar to the Meteor. It's the same engine. I think the gearing's a little bit different. And if we watch his video, we can see that at the beginning of the clip, he's running 55, 60 miles an hour. And then you can see the hill in the distance. So when he gets to that hill, you can see that his bike starts performing like the Himalayan did when I got to the top of that really steep part of that hill. And so we can see him slow down to around 45 or so to get up there. So now we ask the question, how fast does that bike go? Do we say 45 or do we say 60? Because we see him hit 60 in the video, but we also see him bog down to 45. So, like I said, asking the question of how fast does it go, it's a loaded question. And you have to take all of this into consideration, because as somebody who lives in a flat area, say, New Mexico or something, or Kansas or something like that, is going to have a different riding experience than somebody who lives in Northern California. It's different. And so it's a hard question to ask. So when it comes to buying a small bike, because I'm actually looking for a next bike, so I have to ask myself, what kind of power do I need? But I also have to throw in the fuel economy, because riding small bikes gives us a great advantage on fuel range and things like that. Like I said, that's 100 miles a gallon. But I think Honda shot themselves in the foot by only giving it a 1 gallon gas tank. So they can do 100 miles all at once, but you've got to find a gas station within 100 miles because it's going to run out of gas. Himalayan gets less gas mileage, but it has 4 gallon gas tank, so I can go about 280 miles on that bike. So I gotta look at things like that, and you can almost draw a line from a correlation between power output and fuel economy. The higher you go in power output and displacement, the lower your fuel economy goes. And so everybody's kind of got to find a happy medium there. I want to keep. To me, the fuel economy is the more important one. I got to be able to do the speed limit power-wise, so I'm looking for a bike that will maintain the speed limit to my satisfaction, but also give me that fuel economy that I want as well. Because I've owned some very powerful bikes, in my day. I'll throw up a picture of my Buell back in my younger, skinnier, sportier days. And that was a very powerful bike. But if I look back at, how much of that power did I actually use, I might have only used 70, 80% of what that bike could do. And even if I did use that 70, 80%, I was probably breaking the law, to do that. So I had a lot of power that I paid for that I didn't really need to be using. Right? It really wasn't intended from the manufacturer for me to be using that on the street. So I try not to buy excess power in exchange for losing fuel economy. I think the fuel economy becomes more valuable than the excess power, if that makes any sense. I don't want to buy power that's going to cost me, power that I'm not going to use, that's going to cost me fuel economy. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. And and when I mention bikes, I'm usually mentioning like air-cooled V-twins or singles, because that's the kind of bikes I'm in the market for. There's plenty of liquid-cooled bikes that run the gamut. So to me, I think about 40 horsepower is pretty ideal. Maybe I think that's kind of the balance point there. But you got to watch too, because there's outliers. Like the TW we was going to use for this video is an outlier, because each bike we had, the Super Cub, the Meteor, and the Himalayan, as we stepped up in power, the fuel economy dropped off. So we went from 100 to about 80, 90 miles per gallon on the Meteor to about 70 miles per gallon on the Himalayan. But if we threw that TW in the mix, it would have been right behind that bike as far as power goes. It would have been the next step up in power. But that bike got the worst fuel economy of all of them, just due to the way it's fueled and things like that, and the age of the design of the bike and what it's intended to do, gearing and all that. So there's outliers you got to keep an eye out for. So let's cut this off so it's not too long. So when you ask the question of how fast does it go, you have to answer with, well, how fast does it go where? Where are we going? What road are we on? Things like that. That's the more important question, is suit the bike to the environment you're going to ride it in, as opposed to trying to make this blanket statement saying that does 65 miles an hour, when it clearly won't. A lot of the time, it won't do 65 miles an hour. It'll only do it in perfect conditions. How fast does it go? I have no idea. Like I said, it's a question you can't ask. It's a loaded question. So hopefully this made a little bit of sense, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye. Well, I got back inside and started editing the video, and I realized I forgot to talk about the near miss. It happened, I was on the Meteor doing the runs up the hill, and I was having to time those, because even though that's a 55 mile an hour road, even cars don't do 55 miles an hour up that hill because of the turns and things like that. So I had to wait for traffic to get through so I could have a clean run all the way. Because I would just reel the cars in, maintaining 55 up that hill. So I was on the Meteor, and the Meteor has kind of a feet forward, slightly feet forward cruiserish riding position, as opposed to like the Himalayan or even the Super Cub that have a more neutral, sportier position. And it's harder to maneuver that bike. So maintaining 55 as best I could was a little tougher on that bike than the others. But I had completed the run and got over the hill and pulled over at a safe spot and shut the cameras and everything off, and was turned around to go back to the start so I could do the talking segment of the video and discuss how I felt the Meteor did. And on my way back, a Chevy Suburban came around one of those turns in my lane. So he was all the way over in my lane coming around that turn, and it put me off, almost off the road. There was nowhere to go because there's no shoulder there. It's just pavement, woods, ditch. You're off the road if you leave the pavement. There's nowhere to turn. There might be some driveways, every now and then, but it's basically pavement, danger. And so he came around that thing in my lane, and I got over as far as I could, trying to wrestle that Meteor, which isn't a maneuverable, highly maneuverable bike. And best I could, I got it over to where I had that much pavement left, to make this. And I know it was a Suburban because I got a really good look at his emblem on the front, on the grill of that thing as I'm like trying to get past it. And I really was expecting to have my leg amputated. It was that close. It was so close. But I made it, and didn't have a scratch, didn't touch the bike, anything like that. Had I been on the Himalayan, it might have hit the pannier. He was over that far. And I didn't think about it until later, but it actually probably saved my life that I was on a motorcycle. Because had I been in my car, that would have been a head-on collision. And to make matters worse, it was a frickin' cop. It was a police vehicle. Not paying attention to what he's doing, comes around that curve, and there's a car behind him. That was when the lady in that car went by me, she was like, sorry, because he didn't even stop. I had to turn around and chase him down and chew his ass over that because I was livid, and so that kind of added to me not being in the right frame of mind to continue filming, and so that kind of added to me not completing the video I set out to do. Because like I said, that was a near-death experience right there. And to have it be a cop was just the icing on the cake. I was livid, if you can't tell. So yeah, that was my near miss this weekend. So you guys take care out there.